Thank you for joining us for the Voices for Nature podcast with Chris Gambian and Jackie Mumford.
Hello and welcome to the Voices for Nature podcast. My name is Chris Gambian.
And I'm Jackie Mumford.
So we're in the business of politics here at the Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales. We're fiercely non-partisan, but there's no doubt that the decisions that affect nature, that affect our climate, affect our rivers, are all made by people that we elect and who we send to Macquarie Street. So we thought, Jackie, it's about time we sat some of these politicians down and got deep into their minds about what they're thinking.
That's right, yes. And as you said, Chris, non-partisan. So we're keen to hear from politicians across the spectrum. We want to talk to all sides of politics and the crossbenchers and just hear about their priorities for nature. How do they work together? What are they trying to achieve in Parliament? And how can we effectively work with them? And how can our supporters and the people listening tonight have some influence over those decision makers on the issues that we care about?
Now, if you've ever tried to make a meeting time with a politician, you'd know that it can be a bit like herding cats, trying to get them to sit down and sit still for long enough to interview them for a podcast. But we've got a few lined up over the next couple of weeks. But first up, we've got Penny Sharpe, who's the Labor Shadow Minister for the Environment, recently back into that portfolio after Chris Minns took the Labor leadership. But she had been the Shadow Minister for the Environment in the last Parliament, and people would probably know a lot of the work that she's done over the years in the Parliament.
Yeah, that's right. I think, Penny Sharpe has been quite a champion for nature in the New South Wales Parliament. She's sat on a lot of the parliamentary inquiries that directly relate to the issues that we care about. And so, she knows, what's going on. She knows the lay of the land of nature in New South Wales across a broad range of issues, from climate to biodiversity to water, a lot of the issues that we care about and that our supporters care about. I was really excited to speak to Penny, and I think people will be, will enjoy hearing from her as well, and some of her insights on, how we interact with parliamentarians, how she works with people in Parliament, works with government, works with the crossbench, and also how decisions get made in the Labor Party, and how they sort of come up with their policy platforms on the issues that we work on.
Now, full disclosure, I have been friends with Penny for probably more than 20 years, I think, something in that order, since long before she was in the Parliament. And I think I'm not alone, though, in saying that I think she's a person who's earned a lot of respect for her willingness to kind of work across the aisle and get a lot of things done. And she mentions this in our interview, some of the sort of cross-party work she's had to do, because a lot of the issues that she cares the most about tend to be conscience votes. And so you've got to actually go and win every person to your cause. And you just can't do that by being sort of one of those politicians who peacocks around and sort of tries to just make a fuss instead of actually getting something done.
Yeah, and I think what really comes through for me with talking to Penny as well is these are issues that she's thought quite deeply about and cares quite deeply about. And so, you get the impression that she's there doing the work because, she genuinely believes this is important work, which I think really helps in terms of the kind of, drive that gives someone to work on an issue.
So without any further ado, let's hear from Penny Sharpe, Labor Shadow Minister for the Environment.
Thanks for joining us, Penny. Being the sort of peak body for nature in New South Wales, a lot of us are here and a lot of people watching are passionate about these issues because we love nature in New South Wales. And we're just really interested to hear, what are some special places in New South Wales that you really care about, or that, that you like to visit or are special to you?
Oh, where do I start with that question? there are just so many excellent places to go. And one of the things I love about being the Shadow Minister for the Environment is I basically have, prior to COVID particularly, been able to travel the state and meet these amazing people who in all little corners of the state are just trying to look after their little bit of nature. So there's just so many great places. I'm very, very, my favourite national park is probably Murrumarang. That part of the coast I spent a lot of time as a kid, and I've had the go there often and absolutely love it. But there's just it doesn't really matter where you are. I mean, I love the little patches of, urban bushland we have, the little bits of Walleye Creek that people have worked so hard to save. I love, all of the national parks are unique in their own special way. I mean, Kosciuszko is obviously absolutely beautiful, but really you're pretty hard pressed to find a bad spot. But, so for me, I think, it's all of it, but it's ultimately, making sure that the rivers are healthy and that the bush is in good shape and that we're looking after the animals and plants that we're just very lucky to have in this state. So, everywhere is great. I do love the ocean though, and it's been a long time since I've had a swim, so I'm very looking forward to getting back in that too.
Yeah, I think once we get out of our 5Ks, that'll be the first port of call for a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm in the inner west in Sydney, and so it was very hard. But when we had the 10Ks, you could just sort of eke it out. But no, I haven't been near the beach for a long time, and that's looking forward to that greatly.
I got my first swim in the Georges River last Monday, so I'm feeling pretty smug.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Now, Penny, a lot of people listening will remember you as the Shadow Minister for the Environment previously. And we're certainly pleased to have you back. But a lot of people perhaps wouldn't know that you've been in the Parliament for quite a long time now. Can you tell us a little bit just about your pathway into Parliament? Why did you get into politics? I mean, it's a bit of a dirty business. Why did you get into politics?
Look, I think the first thing I always say to people is that it was accidental. It's not like I sort of woke up and as a young person and said, I want to be in Parliament and this is the thing for me. I never really expected that. The thing for me was, look, as a young woman, well, really my entire life, I have a lot of views about a lot of things. And for me, involvement in politics was really about getting into places where decisions are being made and having influence in those decision places and being able to, I suppose, bring the issues that I cared about to the attention of people who are in a position to do something about them. So, I joined the Labor Club when I went to university at UNSW. I grew up in Canberra, not particularly political family, interested in politics, but not formally, involved or anything like that. And I just decided that I had to stop talking about things and needed to take action. So the thing for me was I did join the Labor Club at UNSW, I mean, a very long time ago now. On the basis that at the time, the issues that I was worried about was actually when Labor was changing to the HEC system and moving away from free education. And, I also was very interested and involved in a lot of women's issues as well. I mean, women's reproductive rights has been something that I've pursued my entire life. And for me, it was about, pushing along those kind of issues. More involvement in the Labor Party meant that sort of opportunities came my way. I ended up on Marrickville Council in 2004. And just, when Carmel Tebbit went to be the member for Marrickville, there was a spot in the Legislative Council in New South Wales. And, by then I'd been very involved in the Labor Party, particularly in policy development. And I, put my hand up and the Labor Party was extremely generous and basically said, yep, we want you in Parliament. So I was able to do that. But, for me, politics is a means to an end, which is about change. And for me, it's about social justice. And increasingly, actually, like the environment's been one of those things that I've always cared about, but it's really been as a parent and, over the last decades, we've seen what's happening with climate change and the degradation of our environment. I've just become more passionate about it as an intergenerational equity issue, but also just fundamentally about how do we look after these absolutely beautiful places that need our support and that are sort of last on the list in terms of what people think about when they think about development and growth and jobs. So that's sort of how I got here.
You mentioned that, your sort of way in, or the opportunity that first came up for you was entering the upper house, which is not dominated by any one party. How do you work with others across the spectrum of politics?
Look, I'm someone who actually just thinks that you've got to, on the things that you can agree with, if you get allies anywhere, that you should work with them. And I've been very involved in a lot of areas in politics, and particularly in sort of law, legislative reform that's involved conscience votes. So again, women's reproductive rights, gay and lesbian law reform, and I've been very involved for a long time with cross-party groups on those issues because that was the only way that we were actually going to progress them. So, I like to think that actually I have a good working relationship with everyone in the Legislative Council. I like to think that while there is, furious disagreement on many, many issues, where you can find points that are the same, it's a really powerful thing to have people come together and fight collectively for those, whether that's inside their own parties or whether it's across the Parliament and the Legislative Council. And, one of the things about the Legislative Council, the government don't have the numbers there. And I think it's important actually to reach out and to never really just, I suppose, rule anyone out, because one of the other lessons I've learned is that people are constantly surprising, and you can find common ground. Yeah, it's actually a very powerful thing, and I really enjoy it a lot more, I think, than a lot of the partisan head-to-head conflict-based decision making that there's so much about modern politics.
Yeah.
Members of the Legislative Council talk to each other in the hallway. I mean, it seems to me that it's actually quite a small place, and in some ways, even though you're all in different parties, it is much more like a normal workplace. You've got one tea room, you've got to go and make your cup of tea or get a drink out of the fridge or whatever. Like, what is the sort of collegiate relationship like amongst?
Yeah, I think, look, the Legislative Council in New South Wales is very, it's a small place. There's only 42 of us. And the other, and we do a lot of committee work. I mean, I know that Nature Conservation Council is a regular attender of the various inquiries that Parliament's doing. But because there's such a diversity, animal justice, Greens, shooters, fishers and farmers, One Nation, independents like Justin Field and others, we have a very heavy inquiry load, and we spend a lot of time with each other. And one of the things that's also great about the inquiries and the committee system is that you're not bound in purely partisan decision making. So committees often actually spend a lot of time hearing the evidence. People change their minds. So it also builds relationships. You go, I mean, obviously COVID's not been great, but prior to that, we go on trips together where we go and look at things and we hear from people, and so you do build relationships with people. And I think that there's just this kind of quiet professionalism about, we can accept that we have different views, and particularly the way that we work through committees mostly, people are very respectful of other people's views, and you can sort of learn to understand, look, we're not going to agree on that. Let's not spend a lot of time arguing fruitlessly about it. What do we agree on, and how can we sort of strengthen the recommendations we're making to government on a whole range of issues that we think really do need attention because the evidence has shown that it does.
Yeah, interesting. And this week, Penny, obviously a big week in New South Wales politics. What do the changes in government mean for you and for Labor, but also what do you think they mean for nature in New South Wales?
Yeah, I mean, look, interesting question. I mean, look, my view about Gladys Berejiklian is that she was never interested in the environment. I just don't think that was her thing. She was very much an infrastructure and, been dominated by COVID and people will draw their own conclusions about the competency and everything about all of that. But my frustration had been that, over the last 10 years of this government, that really there hadn't been a lot of attention or priority given to the environment and nature. I think that the National Party have, for the most part, have a very anti-environment agenda. Not all of them, but I do think it's a real issue. And I've been frustrated by the fact that really, so under sort of the Gladys Berejiklian Barilaro team, that we've gone backwards in so much of the kind of regulation and policy work. I do think that Matt Keane was a breath of fresh air. I mean, one of my frustrations, going back to our previous conversation about trying to find points where you can actually work with people. I mean, previously I've looked for people, particularly in the Liberal Party, who cared about nature, and they are there, but they've been very quiet for a very long time. And, under previous ministers, like I can really count on probably one hand, there's probably, the number of Libs who I think genuinely have some sort of passion for nature. And I do think that Matt Keane is one of those. But he's in terms of going forward, obviously he was sworn in yesterday. He's got Treasury now. He's got Energy and Environment, but that's really only until the reshuffle, which will either be sort of January. I suspect it might be a bit close. It might end up being in December, just because they need to get people in place. And we'll know that we'll lose Matt Keane out of that portfolio. So whoever comes next will be a really important signal for how much they want to, have someone who, is prepared to at least talk about how important it is. And look, my other just sort of general observation is that, again, the National Party is such a dominant force that really holds back a lot of the, the reforms that we need if we're serious about habitat, and if we're serious about climate change, and if we're serious about, clean air and clean water. I think it's a real problem. So it's a watching brief for me. As I said, I've got a lot of respect for Matt Keane. I think that he does care passionately about it, and that's great. But there's a lot of work that's not done, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. One of the things that worries me about the environment is it's not a Labor or a Liberal issue. It's actually a whole of state issue that actually is about caring for the land that we live on. Not just for now, but for the future. And I worry that when the pendulum swings too many ways, you don't want this situation where, under the libs, everything gets dismantled, Labor comes in, tries to rebuild it, then, it's backwards and forwards, which, I don't think is good for anyone. I think we need to find just those key principles about what we're trying to do in the environment, the importance it is for all of our quality of life and for the animals and plants.
Yeah.
That's a great segue into our next question, which is, what are some of your priorities? What, if you were the Environment Minister, what do you want to get done?
Yeah. Obviously, climate change is the issue that we all need to, do. And, I think the government's been good in terms of the renewable energy stuff. But, I'm pretty disappointed that their new emissions target is great, 50% by 2030, but it's pretty much looks like it was on track to do that anyway. And the roadmap that they have doesn't even talk about things like land clearing, and doesn't talk. I think agriculture gets one mention, and it's just such a wasted opportunity as well as something that we need to do as a matter of urgency. So look, dealing with land clearing, not just as an emissions-based thing, but for biodiversity reasons, I think remains a priority. I think they've completely gutted that. I think that actually restoring habitat, and particularly corridors, no matter where the land tenure is a massive problem that's not being addressed. We've got fragmentation of habitat everywhere. We're serious about biodiversity and saving all threatened species. I mean, koalas are obviously the one that gets the big billing and extremely important. We need to have a serious plan about that, which supports landholders to actually keep trees in the ground, to work collaboratively with scientists and others to actually, make sure that we not just keep the corridors we've got, but maintain them, but also build them, because we know it's so fragmented. So, generally that kind of habitat protection across all land tenures, I think, is a real challenge for us, but I think it's essential if we're serious about, dealing with, climate change and carbon, but also, we've got a biodiversity crisis, and it kind of gets swept under the table, and, we're fiddling around the edges. We've got to be serious about doing it. The other thing for me is, look, national parks is obviously a huge issue, and how do we, expand conservation efforts? I mean, we've signed up to a range of international commitments that just seem these days to be just, nice to have, but no one takes them seriously enough. Like, I think we've got to have a plan for that. And look, the other thing for me really is, it's that really basic stuff: clean air and clean water. How do we, water is perhaps the most precious public resource. It's, with all of the water inquiries I've been on, I think I'm on my third or fourth one about these, in increasing scarcity and the way in which we're, seeing the degradation of so many of our river systems, we really have to get to grips with good management of that, and we just haven't had that. There's just been too priority of it's got to be prioritised as a public resource, not as a private trading opportunity for a range of different people. And I think that's really, that's the really big challenge, I think. We're obviously doing the inquiry at the moment on floodplain harvesting. There's been, I've done a bunch of water inquiries. Communities are missing out. The rivers are in poor health. We've had so much evidence around that. And it's just such a contested and difficult political area. For me, I think we need to come to grips with that, because communities are dying, letting alone the fish and those kind of things. First Nations communities are just absolutely ripped off under the current system, and we can't just keep saying that we care about it. We actually have to do something about it.
Yeah, a lot of sort of, I guess, challenges and some quite grim issues for the environment. But what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is that people are passionate about where they live, that they really do care about that patch of bush, that tree, the river that runs past, through is the lifeblood of their community. They care about, the native animals that we're so lucky to have. So, I do think there is great hope in terms of the work that local communities are doing every day. We point to this all the time. Landcare is one of the most extraordinary organisations that uses people power and partnerships, and really is making a difference in terms of restoration of land. I just think that there are huge opportunities if we're willing to kind of invest the time and, getting beyond the kind of, let's have a grant for a couple of years and let's pilot this. We know in so many areas what works, but how do we actually just build that into the kind of architecture of looking after the environment in New South Wales? So that gives me, there's a lot of hope there. It is, the challenges that we face are massive, and change does need to happen. But I'm feeling more optimistic about the climate change action than I ever have. Can I just say, not because I think that the federal government has provided any leadership in this space, and I think that New South Wales, has sort of done a bit of catch up in the last couple of years. But look, we've known for 40 years that climate change is a problem, and really the window is closing on the really serious aspects of that. But I do think that is driving a lot of change. I'm optimistic about Glasgow, perhaps not what Australia will do, but actually where the world is at. And, one of the things that I think we're finding is, even where we've got recalcitrant governments, they're being dragged kicking and screaming, because frankly, the world is changing and the market is pushing them to have to deal with these matters. So, I'm hopeful that actually we're going to get the action that we need. But, I don't want to overplay it. It's a serious issue, and we need, we can't keep kind of just doing the easy things. There's harder things that need to be done.
Yep.
Penny, there's a lot of people who will be listening to this who try to make change in their own way, in their own local community, at a state level, at a national level, at a global level. What, in your view, is the best way for people to get heard by politicians in a way that is actually useful and meaningful?
Can I say that many emails coming into my email box is of limited use, but has a place. So, it's not, I wouldn't say don't do it at all, but I would say that it's a limited view. Look, like everything, I really do think that relationships matter. For the local groups that I'm just so lucky to meet and make up so much of the membership of the Nature Conservation Council, I think you're all pretty good at it, actually. But the thing that I would say is, reach out to your local MP, invite them to come and see the work that you do. Find opportunities to talk to them that are not just necessarily sitting in an office when they're very busy. Show them rather than tell them, I think, is actually extremely important. And I think the other thing is, don't make assumptions about MPs either, based on what their politics is or whatever. So that includes people in the upper house. It includes, the system that Labor has is, where we have seats that we're not held. So at every Liberal held seat, there's actually a Labor upper house member who's called the Duty MLC, who's got some responsibility for them, reaching out, talking to them about that, I think is incredibly important. But I think what you do really well is, there's lots of great sort of on the, the science and the evidence is very good. My other, I suppose, hot tip would be, don't assume that we have a lot of knowledge about this. You have a lot of knowledge, very detailed knowledge about your local area. And look, one of the things I find is that people come to see me and they launch into a really long discussion in a great deal of detail about this particular thing. And actually what I want them to do is just to stop and say, look, excuse me, hello, this is our issue, this is where we live, this is why it's important, this is what the science tells us, this is what we think is the solution. That's the other thing too. I mean, a lot of you are experts on the planning system, much better than me. What I would really love is you come and tell me, okay, this is the bit of the planning system that's not working. This is the bit that we need to think about changing. And that's how we deal with it. I'm just going to cough for a minute, just hang on. Hay fever. Sorry.
You and me both. You and me
Yeah,
both.
this time of year kills me.
And Penny, like, I think people have some preconceived ideas about when they go to meet with a politician, or, they obviously know what, might know a little bit about your party and that kind of thing. And I think that can sometimes obstruct people's, understanding or ability to work with different MPs. But maybe just to shed a bit of light on that for people, how do decisions get made in your party?
Well, in the Labor Party, I mean, look, it's a very complicated process, and I accept that it's very opaque. But just very basically, I mean, the Labor Party essentially has an annual conference, supposed to be annual. We've obviously haven't had one for a little while, but we basically have regular conferences. At those conferences, there are motions that are moved by our local branches, and our local branches put up a whole range of issues. But it's actually the collective conference, which is about 800 to 900 people. Half of those are our affiliated unions, and half of them are members who are elected from our local federal electorate councils and our state electorate councils. So they're just ordinary Labor Party members, extremely passionate, excellent people. And the conference kind of works through that, and we have this thing which we call the platform, which essentially is binding on politicians once we get into Parliament. So there's a lot of toing and froing about our platform and what's in it. And it's sort of the high level document that sets out what we want to do and what our principles are. Our environment platform is very good because we've got the excellent work of the Labor Environment Action Network, who are awesome. So that we're sort of guided by that. But in terms of getting to the election, most of your people, I assume, want to know, well, what are we going to do at the next election? The process that we're really going through. So we've actually got a state conference on this Saturday. It's online, so that's not great, but it's better than nothing. So there'll be some stuff adopted at that conference. But really, the shadow cabinet. So for all of the ministers, there's an opposition member who's appointed as the shadow minister. I'm the shadow minister for environment, and it's my job in the next election to basically put together the policies that we'll take to the election. I have to go through a process where we go through the shadow cabinet, and similarly to government, we have expenditure review committee. We've got to balance all of the different priorities into something coherent. That's a very long way of saying and not telling people very much about what they need to do. I mean, look, my view is if you've got views about the kind of policy that we need to have, I mean, I obviously regularly talk to environment groups and others, but I'm very open to particularly smaller groups talking to me about their, those really smaller issues as well, about what needs to be dealt with and what they'd like, commitments from us about. But our process will be, the elections in March 2023. We've sort of spent the COVID time talking to a lot of stakeholders. I've done a lot of reading and really, getting my head back into the portfolio, because I've only been back into it since May. But really, we will have a comprehensive environment policy, as people have. If you've looked at the stuff that we've done for the last couple of elections, Labor sees environment as a priority in terms of what we can do for the state, particularly at state level. We've had we'll have a bunch of policies on things like national parks and on land clearing and on biodiversity and on koalas and all of those things. on marine, on marine parks, all of that kind of business. We'll have policy of that. And if people want to have, I suppose I'm really just inviting people to get in contact with me to talk to me about it. And one of the things you should know about shadow ministers is I've only got one staffer. When you send an email, it comes straight to my phone. It's a pretty skinny operation, but it means also we're very flexible, and we rely so heavily on the kind of intel and evidence and work of your members to help form our views. So that's all really helpful. But the way in which we talk about it, I think is probably important to know. You'll get frustrated with me, I think, quite a bit, because people will want specific answers to these particular things, particularly in the lead up to the election. And it's going to be a while before I can actually give those definitive answers. I hope that I like to take the approach that I'm pretty upfront, and I'll tell you if there's just no way we're going to do anything. But also, I have to work through a process with all of my colleagues. It's a collective decision-making process. It's pretty rigorous. It's also based on how much money we can spend within the envelope, and that includes, so we've got to factor in where are we going to build those schools, where are we going to build that public transport, where are we going to do all of those things. So it's not, there's lots of things I'd like to do and say, yep, we're going to do it, but I suppose I ask for patience. But know that the quid pro quo for that is I'm really open to hearing all of the ideas. And once we do have a very clear policy, really happy to talk to people about it, take them through it, explain why we're doing something rather than doing something else. All of those things I think are really important. But I do ask for a little bit of patience in that area, just because the way it rolls out is, it just takes a bit of time. And where we are in the electoral cycle is, by the middle of next year, you would expect that a big quite a lot of our policies will be out there, because Chris Minns, our new leader, he's, one of the things I really like about him is he says, we are just not going to whinge about things. The time is ticking for when people are going to say, well, what are you going to do about it? And we've got to be in a position, and we want to be in a position to have policies out early, really clear articulation of what we are going to do, what we're going to think about, and what we're not going to do. So, that's, probably we were talking about by the middle of next year, you should expect to see quite a lot out from us.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thanks, Penny.
Thank you for joining us for the Voices for Nature podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, head to our website, YouTube, or your favourite podcast player to find more. Of course, this and all the work we do for nature in New South Wales wouldn't be possible without your generous support. So if you can pitch in, please consider going to our website, nature.org.au, and hitting the donate button. As we like to say, koalas grow on trees, but money does not. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.